Good morning, everybody. This is Jeanette, and I want to welcome you to our second session of Basic Report Designer, where we're going to go a little bit more in depth inside the RD program for Sage. Everybody should have received the material for today, a PDF file for the material that we're going to cover, and then a copy of the PowerPoint as well. If you didn't receive those in an email, they're attached to the GoToWebinar panel, so you should be able to download those and print those out so that you can take notes as we go. So our agenda for today, we're going to review just a small part of the data structure that we talked about last week. Just as a refresher, and then for those of you that didn't join us last week, just to give you a heads up on how the data is structured and where to get information about what are in the files and the records that you may be using for your report. We're also going to talk about formulas. We're going to spend some time just setting up basic formulas inside Report Designer. We're also going to cover some of the functions, some of the more common functions that can be part of a formula within the Report Designer. So we'll review and test some of those. We're going to go back in to the design options, and I'm going to spend some time showing you how to set up a prompt field, how to set conditional print on the columns within your report. And what the prompts and the conditional print will help you with is some of the things that you might be doing when you run conditions every time you run the report. This can help you hard code those conditions into the design itself. And then we'll also take a look at suppressed areas. So if we are conditioning some things out of the report when it prints, how do we tell the system to compress those blank areas so that it's not you don't have a bunch of holes in the report when you actually run it. Lastly, we're going to talk about some report maintenance, saving, some options for where to store your reports, report notes, security, those types of things that you might want to think about as you're building the report and saving it. All right, so kind of a review then as far as the data structure is concerned. Remember that you're dealing with different types of files like master files and the transaction files, which are new, current, and history. And then within those different file types, there are going to be records, available records that you can pull information out of when you're designing your report. One of the things that Sage has created for you to help with this is something called a data dictionary. And what you're going to see in this data dictionary is not only the field name, but what type of field it is, whether it's alpha or numeric, the field length, so what's the maximum length or width of the field, whether or not this field is ODBC replaceable or creatable, whether there are any special values for these particular fields, meaning things that are hard-coded into the software. And then lastly, what are the standard orders, whether this particular record has more than one index to it or not. Every record is going to have at least one order, which we're going to call the primary key. And then anything else that Sage has hard-coded into the system are called alternate keys. And so you need to keep these in mind as far as the sort order that you want to use for the report that you're designing. Now, one thing about these orders or keys to those records, it does do quite a bit of things. So one is, this is what the software uses to find these records quickly. So it's kind of like an address to where that record resides inside the data file. And then as far as the report printing, it does define the sort order, so what order things are going to print in. And then some other access type of things like totaling. The sort order also will list out what you can total by. It also can control line spacing. It can control conditioning. So you need to keep these types of things in mind when you're designing a report. So you could have a report that is going to use the standard order, but you need to subtotal by a specific field within that record. If that record field is not part of the standard order, you won't be able to subtotal. So in that case, you would want to go in and design a custom sort and add that field in. And we're going to demonstrate that today. Now, one of the things I want to show you too is how to find these available records and then the data dictionaries that go with them. So if you go into Report Designer, and if you look up at the top underneath Tools, you'll see an option for Available Fields. And if you click on that, you'll see a list of all the different records within each application, and these are in alphabetical order. So if I take a look, let's say, at the AP vendor record, you simply highlight the record that you want to look at, and when you click OK, it does give you a prompt to include any ODBC information. So if you're designing something in Crystal, or you're going to be doing something even with another third-party program, and you need those internal field names, you're going to check this box. And then when you do that, this is the data dictionary for the AP vendor record. And you can see here underneath it says it's ODBC creatable. So I can design something maybe in Access that I want to be able to update right into my vendor master file, and that can happen. So you can set vendors up outside of Sage. Okay. Now, as far as report writing is concerned, the columns going across here, you'll see your field name. Here's the internal name, again for ODBC. Here's the type of field. Here's the maximum length or width. Whether the field is replaceable or not, there's an X in here. And then any of these fields that are hard-coded specifically by Sage, they'll have a special value, like this type field on the vendor. We have 6 types that are hard-coded. Same with payment days. As you read down the list here, you can see anything that has a value in the special value area is something that is set up by Sage. Now, as I go down the field, I'm going to get down towards the bottom, and here's where I'm going to see the standard orders. So I've got order number 1 is by vendor ID. There's an alternate key to sort by name. So I don't have to set up a custom sort to get it by name. I can change this within the design itself and tell it to sort by this secondary alternate key. There's also, let me get back down to the bottom, a row ID, which I've never seen anybody use, or a row version. Typically, it's either vendor ID or vendor name on this particular record. Now, one thing about the standard orders, be sure that you look at these alternate keys first before you design a custom sort. And we'll talk about this again when we get back in the software. But this is built into this record, this name sort, and it will make your report run faster if you use it instead of doing a custom sort. Okay. Let's get back. Okay. So let's talk about record relationships here for a second. We talked about this last week. Because you may be dealing with a file that has multiple records in it. As an example, the vendor master file not only has the vendor record in it, it also has invoices and the payments and the checks that go with those invoices. And so when you're designing your report, you need to keep that in mind if you are pulling information out of that master file that pertains to invoices. The record relationship one-to-many, AP is a good example of that because you will have a vendor that's going to have potentially multiple invoices. So you need to recognize that each vendor could have multiple invoices, multiple distributions, multiple checks, multiple payment records that go with that, versus the one-to-one relationship, which goes the other way. Each invoice is only linked to one vendor. So you're not going to have an invoice that you receive that is going to be entered into two separate vendors. It's going to go into one vendor only. Versus none, which this is going to come into play today when we talk about functions. You may be pulling records into a report that have no relationship with each other. And so what we will try to do in that case is we'll try to build that relationship with a function or a formula. And the example I'm giving here is check to invoice. If you are running a report and the check record is the driving record of the report, there is no field on the check record itself for an invoice number. So we would have to build that relationship with a formula instead. And in some cases, you may run into a situation where we can't do that, and so we'll have to come up with another way to get that information together, if possible. All right, now speaking of formulas, I want to review again the different types of formulas that we have in Report Writer, starting with a public formula, which is something that is designed by you, and it can be designed outside of the Report Writer, and it's stored in a file called user.frm. You assign it, you set it up, and you give it a name. You can copy it. You can even copy it into a design if you need to tweak it maybe for that specific report. Okay. So public formulas are user-defined. They're stored in a formula folder in a file called user.frm and can be accessed anywhere that you need to pull a formula in, whether it's a report or an inquiry or some other processing within Sage 300. That's different from an application formula. These are provided by Sage. They get installed when you install the software. You can use them in reports or anywhere else that the application uses a formula. What you can't do is create new application formulas. These are, again, provided by Sage, hard-coded. They cannot be changed either. You can't modify them, but you can copy them to a public formula and then modify the public formula, and then use that public formula wherever that application formula was being used, where you needed to make a change. A designed formula is sort of like a public formula. It's user-defined, named by you, can be copied, but it's stored within the report design itself. Now, if you need to use it somewhere else or need to use it in another report design, you would then copy that out to a public formula, and then you would have access to it within the design. The designs themselves have access to all of the public formulas and the application formulas for the application records that you've pulled into the design. And lastly, we have something called a quick formula, which is something that is stored in a column within the design. So you can't name it. You can't copy it. It's specific to that column. I don't see this used very often. Sage has pulled or used quick formulas in some of their standard report designs. And it's just because I think I don't use them when I do report designs, and I'm not really recommending them. It's because you can't copy them or share them. They're hard-coded specific to that column. But we'll demonstrate that so that you can see what I'm talking about when we get into the software. All right, this is on page 2 of the handout. We talked about the types. Now I want to talk about the components of a formula. So when we're in the design stage here and we're setting a formula up, when you need to add fields to the formula, you have to double-click on them from the field list. You can't just type in the field name. You have to double-click on the field itself off of a field list, and that will pull that field into the formula. And you'll actually be able to see when you do that, it'll change color. The fields themselves will be blue, whereas the things that you type in will be black. Okay, the formula operators. Okay, so this is where you're telling it what to do with that formula. So it'll be things like adding, subtracting, or it could be the comparison. And so I want you to write this down in your handout. Typically, the formula operators are the equal to, greater than, or equal to. So I'm going to go down the list here. I didn't put this in the handout until further in the handout, but I want you to go ahead and write down EQ, of course, will be equal to, or you can use an equal sign. GE will be greater than or equal to, and you would use the bracket, the right pointing bracket with an equal sign. Greater than, or GT, would be the right pointing bracket. These are the pointy brackets at the bottom of your keyboard. LE would be less than or equal to, or would be the left pointing bracket with an equal sign. Less than would be LT, which would be just the left pointing bracket, or NE for not equal to. And there's not a symbol, we don't have a symbol on the keyboard for that. All right. Those have to be typed in. So when you're doing the formula and you need to make a comparison, you will either type the symbols or the two letters to represent that operator. And they have to be typed in. If you're putting text into your formula, you have to put quotes around it. Otherwise, it thinks it's looking for a special value that's hard-coded into that particular record. Okay, so text have to have quotes around them, and whatever is inside those quotes has to be exact. Numbers have to come in with no commas or dollar signs or currency symbols. The functions will be typed in. So these are some things that we're going to actually cover when we get into the software. We're going to actually do a basic formula here in just a few minutes, and then we're going to come back out and take a look at these more common functions. Lastly, we have order of precedence. So if you're doing math in your formula, just remember that it's going left to right. It's going to do whatever is enclosed in parentheses first, followed by multiplication and division, and then addition and subtraction. So, keep that in mind when you're doing the math. If you have multiple math calculations in there, maybe you're adding or subtracting something together, and then you're dividing that by another value. If the addition needs to be done first, you need to put brackets around that, or parentheses around the addition first, and then you can follow that with the either multiplication or division. When you're testing your formula, if the value isn't coming out correctly, that's the first thing I would look for. Look at the formula and look at where you've placed your parentheses. All right, we're going to go back into the report designer right now, and let me maximize this for us. This is the report design that we created last week, and I had done a simple formula, but I've taken it off so I can demonstrate this to you again. So we had a final column in our report design called balance, and looking at the fields that we have listed here, we don't have a field called balance. It's in alphabetical order. There's no such thing on the invoice record itself. So we need to either use a application formula for this, or we need to design one ourselves. And so I'm going to go ahead and come up here to the top. I'm going to go to Tools, and I'm going to come down to Formulas, and that's going to bring up our design formula window. If you have any previously designed formulas, they're going to be listed here in this window. To create a new formula, you're going to click on New, and that will give you the window where you can build your formula. Now for us, this in our report design, the formula is going to be amount minus amount paid to come up with a balance. So I'm going to find the field for amount, and I'm actually going to put this in order again. Sometimes it's easier to find your fields by selecting the order button and putting the fields in alphabetical order. And other times it's not. Other times it is easier to find it looking at the default listing. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to find amount, and I'm going to double click. Notice it pulls it into the box where I'm building the formula, and the color here is blue. Now I like to put spaces in between my values just because it's easier for me to see and read as I'm building, but you don't have to. If you're more comfortable just putting the stuff in without spaces, that's okay too. I'm going to type a minus sign, and then I went ahead and hit a space, and then I'm going to double click again over here in the field list on amount paid. Okay. When I have my formula built, at the bottom of the field list, I'm going to click OK, and it's going to prompt me for a name. So I'm going to give the formula a name. Now, a tip here: formula names cannot be two characters and then a space, or just two characters. The application formulas are 2 characters, and so Sage doesn't allow you to create design or public formulas that are in the same naming format. So just be sure you give this 3 or more characters. Or if you want to do a 2-character, use the underline as a space to represent a space or a dash. So some kind of symbol in between. So once I click OK after I give it the name, I'm going to see my formula name listed here. And then I just simply hit close to get out. Now there's other buttons here that we can use if we need to make a change to this formula. If we need to add to it, we can click change, and it brings us right back into the window where we can make modifications. If we need to copy it to a new name, we can copy it. We can even copy it out to a public formula. If we need to delete it, we just highlight it and delete. If I want to see what my public formulas are or my AP formulas, because this the records that I've chosen for this report all come out of AP. It's listed the AP. These are the application formulas for AP. So I can find a formula in here if I want to, or I needed to, and I can copy it. So maybe I like this formula and I want to copy it out and put it in either public or design. I can do that from here, from inside Report Writer. And then once I do that, I can make changes. Notice that I'm highlighted here on this AP formula, my new and my change button and my delete buttons. These are all grayed out. So the only thing I can do is either close out of here or I can copy. Now, once I'm back in my main design window, I can use my index button, go over to the design formulas, and then here in my field list, I see my balance field. I can select where I want to show that, double click, and it pulls it in. Now, that's different than designing something as a quick formula. So if you take a look at the top of page, well, it's the bottom of page 4, the top of page 5. All you have to do to design a quick formula is put your cursor where you want this formula to reside. Come up to Tools and select Quick Formula instead of Formulas. This gives you a window that looks just like the formula window that we selected. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do retainage held. I'm going to just follow the example in our book here. Retainage held minus retainage paid. Now, when I click OK on this, it's not going to ask me for a name. It pops it back into the design, and it's in the column where I said I wanted to place that formula. I can't do anything with this formula as far as copying it. If I want to change it, I just need to come back to Quick Formulas, and it lets me back into it. Okay. So the basic formula setup is pretty easy. We're just coming in here again under Tools, Formulas, and we're using New or Change to come in and create our formula. Now, one thing I want to show you, a nice tip here, is if you need to know where these fields are coming from. If you're at this level and you highlight the formula, down here in this box, it's showing me that I've pulled the amount from the AP invoice and the amount paid also from the AP invoice. If this is too hard to read for you and you want to, maybe it's a very more complicated formula, sometimes it's easier to read if you look at it this way. Click the change, and then you'll see the actual fields and the spacings and the brackets without the record names. If you still need to see what the record is, if you click on the field itself, you'll see up here at the top, it shows you where that record is coming from. So multiple ways to see how that formula is put together. Now, something like this formula that's fairly simple, it's easy to see it down here. But if you're looking at a more complex job cost or payroll formula, it might be easier to click the change button and then click on the fields and look at the top of the screen to see where that information is coming from. Okay. All right, we're going to come back here now, and we're going to start looking at functions. Functions are part of your formulas. They're going to be something that you put into a formula to get a result, right? But these functions have to follow a set of rules based on what the function is. That's called a syntax. And so we've got some rules here for it, and then we're going to go in and we're going to take a look at some of the more common functions that you might be using. Okay. All right, so first off, when you create or you're putting a function into a formula, the start of the function always starts with the function name, like join is the example I've given you here. And then so parameters. Now I've got a wrong. I said parentheses here, but then I typed quote marks in the documentation. So when you start the function after the function name, then you need to place an opening parenthesis. All right, and I'll demonstrate this to you as we get into these common functions. If you are putting constants into the function, you need to put quotes around it. Okay. And that includes a blank space. So if I'm trying to join, which I kind of got these two mixed up. If I'm trying to join the vendor ID and their name together in one section, then that's what the example here is. I'm joining the vendor, comma, and then I've got inside quotes, I've got a space, and then a comma, and then the name. So if you join things together without spaces between the fields, it's going to run them together. And then the pieces of the function are separated by a comma. So you're separating the parts within the parameters is basically what that means. Okay, so let's kind of do an example here. So here is a conditional function, and this is very common. It's the if function. If something is true, give me that value. If it's not true, then give me something else. Okay. So the syntax for the if statement is if, and then the opening parenthesis, followed by the condition, what it is you're looking for, then give me that value, or give me something else. So the example I've given you here is if the pay type is equal to regular, give me units. So this could be a payroll. This is a payroll function or formula where I'm saying maybe in a specific column I want regular hours. So I've designed a formula with the if statement in it that says if opening parenthesis pay type, which is a field on the time record, is equal to, and then this is what I'm comparing. And so, of course, I've got to put it inside the quotes. So if the type is regular, and then a comma to separate, give me units. And again, this is a field off the time record, followed by a closing parenthesis. Oops. Okay. Now we can run if statements together. So see my notes here. You can have up to 19 ifs in one formula. If you need to go beyond that, then you have to start a second formula that starts around that includes that first formula with the first 19. Okay. Now, the operators, I've got those listed here in the PowerPoint. So again, here are the symbols or the letters that you can use. The letters can be caps or lowercase. I just typed them in uppercase so that they stand out. regardless of whether you put in letters or symbols, as soon as you go back in and look at that formula, the system will automatically change them to the symbols. And I guess we do have a symbol for not equal to, two pointed brackets. All right, so here is the full example of a join. So join is where you're taking multiple fields together or text and you're stringing them together. So the syntax is join and then opening bracket or parenthesis, value 1, comma, value 2, comma, and so on. It can be multiple values. So in this example, I'm joining the vendor ID and then a comma, and then I did a quote, and I put my space in here in front of the word total. So that when I add this down, I'm going to put this on my total line, it will actually print the vendor ID, a space, and then the word total for me next to the subtotal for that vendor. And then again, I've got a closing parenthesis. Okay, so this is another common one. You're going to use this to bring fields together that may be taking up too much space. And I'll demonstrate this to you when we get back to our report design. A good example of this is city, state, zip, where you want that to print on the report, but the fields are, it's using up the maximum. If you just use those straight fields off the field list, it's got those values way spread out, and it's wasting space on your report. Part. You're going to use this if you need to pull a piece of a field out. Maybe it's a text, or maybe it's part of a date. Okay, or in my example here, it's part of a job number. Okay, so the syntax is to part, opening parenthesis, the field that you want to do the part on, comma, where to start, comma, and for how many characters, and then a closing. So here, if I didn't section my job number and I've got the year as the first 2 digits, I'm going to part the job number starting in position 1 for 2. So I've got the year as a 2 character number at the beginning of my job number. Okay. So I've got a note here. Alphanumeric is going to start counting from left to right. All the other values go the other direction, right to left. So that includes dates and dollar amounts. Those are left to right. Sometimes, and maybe a good example of the part and join, maybe you want to see month and year. You don't need the date. So you could part the date field 2 parts. One part that would give you the day, the month, and another part that would give you the year. And then you could join those 2 back together with a join function. And you could even, within that join, you could put the slash or the dash in there as well. Lookup. This is another common one and probably the most complicated of the functions. And this one took me a long time to finally, the light turned on one day because I could not understand what all the parts meant. Okay, so this is what you're going to use when you need to build a relationship between 2 records where there is no relationship. So this is the none relationship. So the syntax here is to look up the field that you want to get to, followed by the key for that field, but you're using the fields from the driving record. Okay, so again, look up, go find this field that I want to get, and this is how you get to it. So those fields, those key field values, they either have to exist on the driving record, or you can type them in. Okay, so the example I'm giving you here is go out and find the employee's rate of pay. We've keyed that in payroll in setup employee on the pay button. And I want to know, or I want to grab that rate, maybe for a report, or maybe this is for a formula to look up their rate for sick or vacation or PTO, so that it uses that amount when I actually pay that person. So the way that would look is look up the amount off the employee pay record, and to get there, I need to click in the employee ID from that record. There's a comma in here too, I forgot, comma. This number 1, this is the pay type, whether it's regular, overtime, other. So in the when you look at a data dictionary for the employee pay record, this number is part of the index for that amount. And then that's followed by the pay ID itself inside the quotes, and then a closing parenthesis. So when I run this in a payroll report, if I've got this function sitting in my report design, it will actually go out to the employee's pay record and grab their regular rate of pay, because I have pointed the design to that record to get the amount. Okay. So again, this is probably of all of them the hardest to understand, because you have to go to this record that you're looking the value up on, and you have to get the standard order from there. And then you have to build that into your lookup using fields or text to build that order so that the driving record, when you run this report, the driving record can find it. And sometimes when you have pulled fields into a report, even though they're from the same application, and you try to add a field to a report design from one of those other records, you may get a message that says, can't pull that in. Use a lookup formula to get that information. And it's probably because, most of the time, it's because you have a custom sort built, and the system can't can't find that information when you pull the field in. And so it's going to force you to create that lookup to get that value. ASUM. This is a way of totaling a field. So the syntax here is to type in ASUM, and then the first field that comes in after the opening parenthesis is the field that you want to break for a total by. So in my example here, I'm saying ASUM by vendor. So I've got a opening bracket, vendor, comma, and then the field that I want totaled. So this could be the field off the invoice. Maybe I'm looking for just a grand total by vendor instead of printing the detail. Okay. So again, it's ASUM bracket, the field that you need to break the total by, comma, the actual amount field that you need added up. Okay. If you're looking for just the day out of a date, you can do day, syntax is day, and then the date field itself inside the brackets. This is a simple one. The day, the month is the same way, and so is the year. So you could actually, instead of, I'd given the example of part and join, you could actually use month and year, two separate functions. You have to create those functions, and then you could join them together. Multiple ways to do that. the last one we're going to talk about is new date. So you're taking a date field and you're adjusting it so that you can do some other type of calculation. So the example I'm giving here could be a formula to show when a person might start getting a benefit like accrued sick or accrued vacation. So I want to know when they've been here a year. So I can type in new date, all one word, opening parenthesis, the date field, comma, and then the number of months, comma, or days, comma, or years that I want to add to that hire date is my example here. So I'm going to say new date, bracket, the hire date out of payroll setup employee, comma, 12, comma, 0, comma, 0. I'm not adding any days or years to this function. I want to know when they've been here 12 months. And then I can use that date field in other formulas or functions to compute when a benefit is supposed to start. Or if this is an aging report in AP or AR, this could be invoice date or accounting date. When does that value go out into another bucket? So this could be invoice date, comma, 0, comma, 30, comma, 0, closing bracket. Again, we're taking an existing date and we're modifying it so that we can use that in some other function or report or formula as a new date to use. Okay, we're going to now jump back into the software. We're going to move to prompts. Prompts are a way for you to move the conditions out to that front screen when they're running the report so that they don't have to use conditions every time they run it. They can put their values right on that screen and then it will use those values to run the report. So there's 3 parts to this. We're going to first add the prompt to the design. Then we're going to create a formula that will do the equal to, not equal to, greater than, using that prompt field in conjunction with another field another field in a record in this report. And then we're going to add that formula to the conditions area of the report. All right. So let's go through all of the stages here. So let me get back into our report. So prompts are up here under design. So you'll click on design and you'll come down here to prompt windows. If this is a required entry, you'll put it under required. Or if it's an optional one, meaning it's only going to matter if the person running the report clicks on the options button in the print selection window when they start the report. Most of the time, these are going to be required. Right? When you click on that, it brings up the prompt window screen. So what you need to do here is wherever you want this value to be, you're going to click your cursor in that window, and then you'll get the prompt options window down here at the bottom. And it's defaulted to create field. So you'll click OK, and that brings you up to the field contents window. So this is on page 10 in the handout. You're going to give it a description. And then you'll tell it what the type is. So we can do text, we can do numeric or checkboxes, time, phone number, we can even create a drop-down list here. So this is going to be, I'm going to put a little colon there, it's It's going to be a date field. And we're going to make it a required entry. And this is the format that I want it in. And I'm going to use this description as the field prompt, meaning this is what is going to show up right back here. So when I click OK, it brings the field back in. Okay. Now I'm also going to add another field here, and you need to give yourself enough room. So that's a tip here. Don't just click it right here because you won't have any room to put your text in. So make sure that you move over far enough, click, and then click OK to create the field. And then you're going to put in ending date. Again, it's going to be a date field, and it's going to be required. Okay. Now, if I'm building some of these other fields, like a checkbox, those, depending on what you select in the type, that's how it's going to display the rest of the screen. And then again, date shows this. If I want to do a drop-down list, it shows here. I can put in items and they'll list here. Now, one thing to understand is that you can't move the items up and down. So as you start building this, if you make a mistake, you're going to have to use the Erase Last button and erase from the bottom up to where you need to insert or correct something and then add the information back down. And then with these, again, you can have an initial value pop in. So if it's, typically the majority of the time it's one item off this list, you can put the value in here. You can tell it how many rows and what the width is here in these fields on the drop-down list. And you can also tell it to open that drop-down list automatically or not. All right. Okay. So again, just depends on what type you select as to what the rest of these fields are going to do. I'm going to move this over here. And I might, once I get the fields in here, I might move, you can click and drag things over. Maybe I want this to come over and be a little bit more centered on the window. So you can do that. I can also increase the size. So I can drag this down. So maybe I want to move this down because I'm going to put some text in here. Again, I'm clicking on the field and I'm just dragging the field down. Okay. So I might want to put, again, some text in here, so I can, again, up above, I can click in an open spot, and instead of create field, I can select create text, and then I can type in the text that I want here. I can tell it to bold if I want to bold, and then I can tell it a color. Right? And then once it's on the window, I can click on it, drag it over, and maybe center it here a little bit more. Okay. All right, so that is the first step to creating a prompt window, is to actually create the fields that are going to show up when we run this report. So that when I actually run this, instead of me having to add a condition every time I run it, I can put a date range in. I'm going to see this when I start the report. I put the date range in, run it, and I don't have to do that condition. Okay. Now, step 2 is to create a formula that will be the condition that we're going to add to the conditions window. So I'm going to come back here to formulas, and I'm going to go with another new formula. And I need to find invoice date. So I'm going to put this back in alphabetical order. And I'm going to say invoice date here. And then I'm going to say greater than or equal to. And I'm going to index over to my prompt fields. And I'm going to grab starting invoice date. And I'm going to say and, because I want the second condition to pass as well. I'm going to come back up to AP invoice. I'm going to say invoice date again. I want less than or equal to, and I'm going to come back to the prompt field, and I'm going to put ending date. So in order for this to run, when I assign this condition to this report, the invoice date has to be greater than or equal to the starting date that I put on the screen, and that invoice date has to be less than or equal to the ending date that I put on the screen. Then I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Now what I always do, just to make things kind of the same, consistent from report to report, when I set conditions up, I will put what the condition is about, and then in capital letters, I'll put CND, kind of an abbreviation for condition, so that I know when I'm looking through the formulas that this is a date condition. If I'm conditioning on an amount or some other field within the record, I will put that name and then CND afterwards. So now I've got my date condition set right there. All right, the third step is to come in here under conditions. And we actually had set some conditions on this report from before. I'm going to come down to the bottom here. I'm going to add, and I'm going to index over to my design formulas. And I'm going to say the date condition has to be equal to, this check mark means true. So that means that the date has to fall within the range that I enter when I start the report. Now let me show you what that means. So let me say that if I run this, see, here are my prompt fields now. Before, it just came right into this screen right here. So I can give it a date range. I'm not sure, this is the sample data, so it's old, so I'm not sure if there's anything in there for January, but let's see. Yep, I've got one. So it's only showed me one page here, these two invoices. Okay. Now let's say I want to see through March. Let's see if we get more, and we do. So we've got February, a couple Februaries and a March in here. So I don't have to go to the condition window to put my date range in. I can put it in right here using a prompt. Okay. And these prompts can be, they don't have to be just dates. The prompt could be a job number greater than something, or a vendor ID greater than something, or a status equal to something, or closed equal to some, whether a job is open or closed. It's whatever. Look for things that you are constantly coming to this condition window and adding, okay? And having to change it every time you run the report. Look to see if there are some of those that couldn't be moved out here so that you don't have to use that condition button. All right, the next thing we're going to take a look at here, let's get back in here, suppressing. So if you have pulled information into a report, and some of your records have that information and some don't. So it could be address information. That's the example we're going to use today. Could be other types of static information too, where some of your jobs have it, some of them don't. Employees the same, vendors the same. Do you want the report to leave that empty space on the report, or do you want to suppress that empty space? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to move all of this down, because I'm going to put an address to field in here. So I'm going to grab this and move it down so I have room right here to add off the vendor record, I'm going to add address 2. So now when I run this report, I've got this blank space in here. So notice, yeah, this guy doesn't have, most of these guys don't have a second line, but it's putting a blank space in here. So what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to change my view up here at the top. So right now the view is set to normal. And those of you that were with me last week know that normal means you can't see any attributes. It's just black on white, and you have no idea how often something is going to print, which is your print controls. So I can see here that, yeah, and actually this has the wrong print control. It's being told to print once per invoice. That's not what we want. So I'm going to make it print once per name. So it should be the same color as all of this up in here, which is all the static information. And then all of these are set to print once per invoice record, okay, versus suppressed areas. So I'm going to come down here and change my view to suppressed, and I'm going to tell it that I don't want this line here to print if it's blank. And I do that by clicking down here where it says suppress option at the bottom of the screen. I'm going to click the checkbox to suppress blank rows. And when I say OK to that, you'll notice that it changes color. So that's how you can tell if you've got suppressed areas in a design. If you change your view to suppressed areas, you will see anything marked in yellow that's being suppressed. So now when I run this report, we save it, run it, now it's not showing the blank lines. So it's only going to display for anybody who has a second address. All right. The next section we're going to go to, this is on page 16. Close this and cancel. We're going to talk about conditional print. So that's our third type of view here. And you can tell if you have any conditional print, those fields will be, the lines around the field will be different colors. That's how you can tell. Now, if you want to do a conditional print, you simply click on the field within the column that you want to do a conditional print on, and down below where it says print when true, if you click into that area, you will see a window that comes up where you can select a formula or that will be a condition on whether to print or not. So once you click on that field, most people will then click on suppress blank lines if it's false. You don't want the spaces in there. And you click OK. Notice now that it's changed color. The field and the dashed lines around it are a different color. And I can tell what the condition is, or the condition for the conditional print is, by clicking in that field. And then down below, I can see that it's using the date condition. Now, if I accidentally put it in there or it's wrong, I don't want it, or I need a different formula for the condition, I can come back into it and click delete, and it will take it off. Now, the best use of these conditional prints, I think the best example of this is if we open up one of the aging reports. Let me get into one of the standard standard aging reports here. And actually, what have I got here? Let me do it by name. Let's get in here. AP, where are you? AP invoice aging. Let's use this one. Okay, and then let's change our view here to conditional print. So here we've got a print detail condition that says it's got a bunch of stuff in here. So if include retainage is yes, then we're and the A sum is not equal to 0, then take the invoice minus retention. Now this, they put the condition or the conditional print on the entire line, so that if an invoice fails in any of these columns, then it's not going to print if it fails this particular condition. We've also got a condition on the name field. So we've got a vendor condition, which says, it basically says the same thing. So conditional print is different than conditions in the way it runs the condition on the transactions, the individual transactions that are making up the report. So it's going to be either a line of detail that's being conditioned out or in, versus something that's global for the entire report design. Sometimes, if you put the condition out here under design conditions, it may not work. So if that's the case, if the condition is not working and it's listed out in here, then what you need to do is you need to put it under conditional print instead. Okay. And the example in your handout on page 16 and 17, this is for a design that is maybe it summarizes by vendor, and you're grabbing invoice amounts that are over 30 days or under 30 days. And so there are two formulas for that. And then you put conditional print in one in each column so that each of those amounts are tested separately. And that's another reason to use conditional print area instead of a condition on the whole report, because that won't work. It's when you're trying to isolate an amount in a specific column. Mostly that's what it's used for. Okay. All right, a couple of other things here. We do have a font area. So if you want to change the font in a certain place, you can highlight, and then you can change using the format drop-down. You can change the just by doing the character, you can change the font. And I think from here, let me get to it, we can even change the color. So if you have fields or columns in a design that you want to be a different color, you can change that. So let me close this design. Let me change our view back to print controls here. A couple of things I want to show you. So maybe I want the invoices to be, let's go in here and change the color. and maybe make the invoices red. Let's see what that does. So now if I run this, okay, so I've got colors. Okay, I want to demonstrate the join function here. Notice that I've just pulled city, state, and zip all to one field at a time, and when I run it, these are kind of spread out. So I'm going to do another formula here, and I'm going to say, let me index first. Let me get back to the vendor, and I'm going to say join opening bracket, and I'm going to join the city, and then I need a comma between city and state. This comma does not print on the report. I have to actually put the comma inside quotes. And I'm going to go ahead and put the space in there too. And then I need another comma to separate it from state. And then I need another comma. And then I need another quote and maybe two spaces. And then a quote to separate it from the zip. And then a closing bracket. And I'm going to call this city, state, zip. So I know what it is. And then I'm going to go ahead and take this out. I just hit the delete key on my keyboard. I'm going to index back over to my design formulas, and I'm going to grab city, state, zip. And so now when I run this, it pulls them together. Instead of stretching them all the way across out in here, it's actually pulled them together, and it's printed the comma. I've got the space. I've got double space between state and zip. So this comes in handy if you're trying to run some type of an employee list or a vendor list, and you've got more fields that won't fit going across the page, and you've included city, state, zip. Maybe combine those into one field, and that with the join that will free up some space. Right, some other types of tips here. Okay, one thing that you probably notice when I'm running this report, it's asking me for the file that I want to use, and I'm always using the same one. If that's the case, if you're always going to use the same files when you run the report, if you go to Design and go down to Data File Selection, you can tell it which file to use. Unselect, select when printing, and then highlight the file that you want to use, and click OK. Now, when I run this report, it jumps right straight to the date. It doesn't ask me anymore. So that saves me an extra step when I run the report. So again, that is under Design, Data File Selection. All right, on page 18, starting on page 18, we've got a couple of things to. And actually, that data file selection is at the bottom of page 21. But go back to page 18, and let's talk about location of design files. Inside file locations. So if we come in and we take a look at, let me find it here, company settings, file locations, there is a prompt for reports. Right? If you leave this path name blank, all of your report designs are going to be saved in your data folder by default. If you are sharing reports, with other company folders on your system, you can maybe create a custom reports folder and then put that path name here where it says data folder. Type that path name out so that you're saving your reports outside of your data folder and outside of the report folder that's underneath the software. So my recommendation is that you save your reports in either a special custom report folder and you have a path name in here, or you leave this path name blank and all of your report designs are stored within your company data folder. If you just have one data folder, that's perfect. That way, if you have to reinstall the software, it's going to reinstall the report folder underneath accounting, and you don't want all of your custom reports to get overridden. So just make sure that you have a good location for your custom reports that you're saving to your system. Now, once you have a report designed, wherever this report needs to reside, you need to go in and use Report Manager to add it. So I'm going to come back here to my Sage desktop, and I'm going to come into Accounts Payable, and I'm going to open up the full AP module. And I'm actually going to come back here to Report Designer. I need to close. I'm going to save and close this report. And then back in AP, this is at the top of page 19. You're going to come in under Reports, Reports Manager, and you need to add this report to AP so that other people and even yourself, you can access this report from Accounts Payable or whatever application you've designed from there instead of having to go into Report Designer to run it. So you're going to click on New. You're going to give it the name of the report, how you want the title to be displayed. And then under Menu Group, you can use the List button, and you can see if you have a subgroup already created. We have one here for Custom, so I'm going to put it in the Custom area, or you can give it a new name back here. You can type a name in, and it will create that subgroup for you, or you can leave it blank, and it will just put it at the bottom of the first drop-down. The default is that this is a TS report design, meaning Timberline software, or an RD report, so it's Sage. Your other choices are Crystal. The ones that say special, you're not going to actually use special, and Office Connector, you only use that if you've created something with Office Connector. Special, I'm not even sure why this is here. This is for the hard-coded reports from Sage, like in General Ledger, financial statement designs, or trial balances. You don't ever change those. Okay. You'll come over here to the file name, use your List button, find your report design, either double click or open, and it pulls it back into the file name field. And then you'll click OK, and you'll see it down here at the bottom. Now, if you want to move the report up, you can. Your other choices here, other than to close out or do new, you can do change. So maybe I want to change where this report is located, or I want to change the design name or the title. I can do that. You can delete. So any of these reports that you never use, if you want to shrink the list up, you can. Just highlight them and delete them. The arrange lets you move up. So if you want to move this up, I don't know if I have any other customs out here. Let's see. Oh, I do. Nope, I don't. Let me get up here farther. Maybe I want to move the custom ones up to the top. So I'm clicking that Move Up button, and I'm moving it up. And I do have one here, so let me move it down. And maybe put it at the top of that. We'll OK it. And then I'm I'm going to close. Now what it's doing right now is it's synchronizing the list of reports, and it's adding it for security purposes. So if you are using the Sage Security, you need to go into any of the roles that are running AP reports, and you need to give that role access to the report design. If not, the only people that will see this brand new report are those that are application administrators. Anybody else that is in a different role will not see the report on the drop-down. So if I come in here and look at custom, I wouldn't see, if I have security turned on and I am a limited user, I won't see this until you go in and add it for me in security. So now I can run this report from here, from inside AP. I don't have to go to Report Designer to run it. The other thing I can do here, if you're for security purposes, is I can put a password on these. So if I go to Tools and I go to Design Security, this is on page 20, I can put a password in here, and then no one can go in through Report Designer. If they don't know the password, they will not be able to change the report. Okay. Design Notes, top of page 21. If you want to put in some comments in here on how a report has been designed and why for future designers, that's what this is for. Now, what's kind of nice here is if I open up, let me open up specifically in job cost. Let me get down to the job cost reports. Let me see if I can open up this one. And if I go to Design Notes, okay, Sage has been real good about putting notes in. So if you want to know, some things about a report that came from Sage, you should be able to get some information if you come in, open the design up in RD, and go to Design Note or Tools Design Notes. Excuse me. Not Tools. It's under Design Notes. Okay. So if you've built a report and there's some complex type of formulas and you need to remember why you did certain things inside this report, you can put it here. The other place that you can put those kind of notes, we talked about this last week, in addition to here, you can also type stuff in here. Remember that anything underneath this pink line does not print on the report when you run the report. So you can put notes in here, maybe describe certain formulas the way you did them and why. Close out of here. Okay, let's go back through here. I want to make sure that we have talked about some of these things. Now, as you're designing the report, if you want to get more room out here in the body, you can undo the field list, and that takes the field list off. Or if you're needing to update a report and you need to see that field list, just click back on it underneath View. Okay. And then again, we're showing the header and the body. If you want to see the footer, you can. And then you can go to any of these areas that we've talked about today, either print controls or suppressed areas or conditional. If you need to format a column, just double click on the field is the easiest way. Just double click and it shows you how that field is going to be formatted. So you can change the length. So if you're trying to make more room in a report, one thing I would suggest is that you cut the length down on some of these fields. If it's a description, cut the length down. If it's an amount, cut the length down, and even take out the commas if you need to get enough room to get all the fields that you need on the report. Okay. Under design, we talked about totals last week, but again, here's the total window. Now again, remember that the sort order is going to control what you see on this screen. So notice that instead of vendor totals and summarized by vendor, it's saying by name, because my sort order is set to be name invoice order. So your sort order controls more than just the order that something's is going to print in. It's going to control what you can total by on this window, either total or summarize by. It's also going to control your line spacing. So what the fields that you see here on the line spacing window is controlled again by the sort order. It's going to control your group page breaks. Again, what you see on both sides of the screen, controlled by the sort. We've talked about conditions. We're looking at print controls. We've done our prompts. We've looked at our data file selection and our data notes. Under tools, we've talked about available fields. There is a design info option up here at the top. And let's do a print preview on this. Kind of difficult to read, but if you want to get a hard copy of how the report is put together, you can do this design info, and this will actually show you how the design has been built. It'll show you, sort orders. It'll show you. Not sure if it shows us the. Get down here and see the prompts. It's showing print controls. It's not actually showing us what these fields are with the X's. So you'll have to know what that is, because they haven't actually pulled that information into the design. But again, if this makes more sense for you to read, you have that option to print this out. Again, this is under Tools, Design Info. And then our available fields, again, gets us to our data dictionaries. And like I recommended last week, if you are pulling reports out of the same fields or records, the same records for multiple reports, I would print some of these data dictionaries out and start a binder. Sometimes it's easier to have a hard copy of what's in that data dictionary to choose from than trying to bounce back and forth between available fields and this design window. Okay, we've covered formulas pretty well. We just talked about assigning passwords. So I think we're good here. Again, when you're in one of these views here, whether it's print controls or suppressed or conditional, once that view is activated, if you want to see how something has been set up, just a tip, highlight the field, and then down below the setup, the body of the report, you'll see this little area here that's got one line in it, and it tells you, here I'm printing once per invoice. So this is my print control. How often is this value, excuse me, going to print on the report? And in this case, once per invoice record. If I'm looking at the vendor information, if I click on the name field, it's again telling me it's going to print once per name. If you need to change that, just click into that field at the very bottom, and it brings up the print control screen, or the conditional print screen, or the suppress option. Okay. That's how you can quickly get to how or where you can make the change. The other way you can get to it, highlight the field, come up to Design, and go to Print Controls. I think that's a little bit more clumsy. It's easier to highlight the field and click down below, and it pops up the window. Oops, let's see here. Okay. Okay, so we've done some of these things already. All right, so let's talk about some tips, reminders. So the first reminder, that sort order, it's not just the order that the information is going to print in. So if you're looking for a totaling field or a line spacing field or a page break field and it's not on the screen, you need to add it to your sort order. Tip, to save your designs in a separate folder. Try not to save them in your report folder under accounting, because if the system needs to be reinstalled, it'll replace that report folder with the report folder from the install. So unless you have a backup of that report folder, you might lose your designs. A reminder, inside Sage, let me get up there here. If I go out to under Program Data, under Sage, under Timberline Office, under 9.5, under Accounting, there is this report folder. This is the one I'm talking about. There are literally hundreds of reports that come from Sage. So if you are looking for a report maybe in a certain order or by a certain value and you don't see it on the drop-down list inside that application, come in here and look at the reports that are listed. They're in put them in alphabetical order, and they'll be in order by application. Look to see if there isn't something in that grouping that is maybe close to what you're looking for, and you can open that up in Report Designer or add it to your reports menu and run it to see if that might be what you're looking for. Okay. It's always easier to start with an existing Sage design and tweak it if there's one that's close to what you're looking for. If not, then you need to go ahead and start from scratch and build a new report. Okay. So again, hundreds and hundreds of reports are in this folder. They are not all on the reports dropdown inside each application. Sage only built the ones into those dropdowns that they thought were the most common. But there might be something else out there that is close to what you're looking for. Okay. Another tip on the formulas. If you're having trouble with your formulas and you can't figure out, how they're working or how they were designed, and you're trying to troubleshoot that, let me go back in here and show you a tip here. If you go to Tools, Formulas, and open this window up, have it open on your screen. If you go to File, Print, and you can do a print preview from here, you can see how that formula is built. And with this open on your screen, you can do File, Print. Oh, actually, let me not do it that way. If I close this, I can do Printer Setup. I can uncheck Print to File, and then I can hit Start, and it will print. So print your formulas out, because sometimes it's easier to troubleshoot them if they're all together, printed out, hard copy in front of you, and you can draw lines and mark things out and whatever you need to do to troubleshoot it down to why it's not working. Okay. And then lastly, from last week, hit that save button. If you're doing a very complicated report, as you start building it, save it, give it its name, its design name, and then as you keep going, hit that save button every once in a while. Because if something happens, the power goes out, for whatever reason, the program throws you out, you will have lost everything that you just did. So it's not writing to anywhere until you hit that save button. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground today. If you have any questions that you'd like me to answer, right now, or if there's any areas that you would like me to go back to, if you want to type your questions into the chat area, Tina can read those back to me, and I'll be happy to stay on the line here for a few minutes and answer any questions or go back into the software for anything that you'd like me to revisit.
Okay, we do have one question.
Okay.
And it says that I have a report I set up after last week's class. When I tried to open it back up today, I got an error that says this program has quit. Outside window limit TS 5620. What does this mean?
TS 5620. You're going to need to get a name and an email so that I can contact them back.
Okay.
Because I'm going to have to look. I'm going to have to look that error up in the knowledge base. So if you can, if you can send me their name and their email address, I will get back to them.
It
could be. I mean, yeah. If the report was not, for whatever reason, if it wasn't saved correctly, sometimes that'll happen, and sometimes you'll get thrown out with a TS error like that if it's very complicated. But the report we did last week, it's pretty simple, so it must be something else. So I'll take a look at the knowledge base and see what that error is. Okay.
Okay, that's cool. Awesome. And then we have another question. Says, does the report auto fit across a page?
No. Meaning does when you run it or when you're designing it. So if I'm looking at this design right here, it will let me build across until I reach like 250 characters going across, and then it won't go any further. When you run this, it's going to use up however many spaces you've used in the design itself. So there's not an auto fit option like there is in Financial Statement Designer.
Okay, yeah. The answer to the question was when she runs it. So yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, beautiful. Let's see, get a couple more here. I just gotta be sure I didn't miss any. Hold on. Okay, I have a report that I increased the size of the font, but it's still small because it's trying to fit on one line. But there extra space is shown between fields. I'm not sure if that's one or two questions.
So is this when they are doing a print preview or when they're actually sending it to the printer? It may be different. It may be different when it's physically printed versus when you're doing the print preview.
Okay, makes sense. Oh, print preview and print, both instances. It's doing
okay. Sometimes this area up here at the top doesn't increase or decrease like it should. Up here where it's got the company name and the title and the page number. And I've seen it's this thing right here. And I've seen sometimes where that can kind of mess up the report. So make sure that this page number doesn't go any farther out than the last column on the report. because that may be messing it up. The report is also going to take this header into consideration as well. The page number is not lining up with the edge of the report. That could cause a problem.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay, and I'm not sure, Linda, did that answer everything that you asked? Because I see we have the question about extra spaces shown between fields. Okay, it's all set. Okay, good. I think that's it, Jeanette. If I missed anything from anybody, just email me, let me know.
Just let me know about that TS 5620 error. I will look that up right now, and I'll find out what that is. I'm glad you guys came back for session 2, and if you think of anything later, just let Tina know, and she'll forward that to me, and I'll be happy to answer any other questions that you guys come up with.